Now we go overseas because there's trouble not just in the United Kingdom, not just in the United States. There's also trouble in a land that is lucky enough to be born in a beautiful part of the world, the Himalayas, but at the same time is between two giants of the 21st century, China and India. I'm speaking to Nepal, of course. Gordon, a very good evening to you. My friend Gordon Chang is here. Gordon, Nepal, it is a beautiful country, but it is troubled because China is aggressive and India is passive, and Tibet is under persecution. Do the Tibetans seek refuge in Nepal?
Well, they've been trying to, but the flow of Tibetans over the Himalayas into Nepal has been restricted because the Chinese, working with the Nepalis, have been able to cut off the Tibetans as they flee repression.
We go now to our colleague Blair Glencourse. He is the founder of the Accountability Lab. I recommend the website. Blair is in Kathmandu in Nepal, and he's been reporting there for these last days. And there are troubles in Nepal in the south. Relatively speaking, Kathmandu, Blair tells us, is peaceful, but how peaceful? There's no constitution. The government is continuing to struggle to form. The Maoists are said to be part of the government. And at the same time, Blair, I believe you're reporting that a corrupt official has now been put in charge of the anti-corruption campaign. Is that all correct, Blair? A very good morning to you.
Thanks, John, and hi, Gordon. Nepal is a beautiful and incredible country. I'd recommend that anyone come and visit. But as you mentioned, there are some difficulties at the moment. Since the end of the Civil War in 2006, the political parties haven't been able to agree on a new constitution. There's an intractable political deadlock now, and the rise of identity politics and factional divisions within the political parties, I think, is very dangerous. While the official disarmament process is finished, there is some insecurity in the south, which is not helped by the economic problems in the country, which are fueled by very difficult electricity cuts, which can last for up to 16 hours a day, a lot of industrial and political strikes, very difficult labor relations. So things are tricky, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of strategic rivalry too between India and China that see Nepal as a strategic backyard in different ways. The Chinese, of course, worried about the Tibetan issue, and the Indians worried about the Maoist problem because they have their own Maoist insurgency through the center of the country and are worried about links with the Nepali Maoists too.
Blair, what about the monarchy? Nepal was a monarchy. The last king was overthrown. Is there any sense that the monarchy might come back because things have gotten so bad in the last couple of years, or is that just impossible?
The story of the monarchy in Nepal is a fascinating one, actually. The Crown Prince killed the majority of the royal family in 2001 in a massacre in the royal palace. The king was replaced by his brother, who then became increasingly authoritarian and was overthrown by a people's movement in 2006. So since then it's been a republic, but the king is still in the country. And there are some royalist parties that seem to be gaining more popularity in recent months and years. I think realistically there's no chance of the monarchy coming back, but I think the shift to the right and the support for what people perceive to be a slightly better past indicates the problems of the current realities.
Blair, I want to focus on the Tibetan story because we do a deal of reporting with Tibetans in exile, and we recently spoke to the Prime Minister traveling in the United States, the Prime Minister of the government in exile in Dharamsala. And what we know of what's going on in Tibet is forced immigration, repression, suppression of the Buddhist monks, and also Chinese patrolling very carefully because of the self-immolation tragedies that are growing in number. Do you see any of this repression or threat or intimidation in Kathmandu of the Tibetan refugees there? Do you see the Chinese there in Kathmandu intimidating the Tibetans or intimidating the Nepali government to in some way constrain the Tibetan refugees or immigrants?
The Tibetan Nepali issue is a tricky one. As you point out, the Chinese are very wary about the number of Tibetans in Nepal. There are very close ethnic and historical ties between Nepal and Tibet. And although I don't see it on a daily basis in Kathmandu, I think the Chinese are carefully creating an environment in which any kind of a movement, that might originate in Nepal could be quashed. They're putting a lot of money into Nepal in terms of investment in infrastructure. They're building political ties. They're creating scholarship programs. Huge amounts of investment in good political relations with the Nepali government to make sure that any kind of trouble won't arise. So I think it's more indirect than direct.
What you're telling me is that, Blair, what you're telling me is that they're bribing and they're making it too sweet to turn to the Tibetans. Is that a fair summary of what they're doing?
Well, I wouldn't say it's bribery directly as much as carefully cultivating political ties in a way that create a certain dependency.
So, Blair, what are the Indians doing about this substantial increase in Chinese influence in Nepal? Are they just sitting back, or are they trying to counter it?
I think the Indians are very worried, and if you read the Indian press these days, there's quite a lot of alarmist language about what China is doing in Nepal. The Indians, of course, are very wary about China. They had a conflict with China in 1962. There are ongoing border issues and larger strategic concerns between these two rising powers. So the Indians are also putting in a lot of money to Nepal, doing their best to build political relations in similar ways. And India is still by far the biggest investor in Nepal, but things are changing rapidly, and it'll be interesting to see what happens over the coming months and years.
Let's talk about the lack of constitution. I've heard this story for so long. Do they want a constitution? Is that a threat to them? Is that why the delay?
They absolutely want a constitution. The people want a constitution. The issue is that fundamentally there's no agreement on what they want the shape of the state to be, what they want the future of Nepal to be. There's a lot of talk about federalism here as a way to bring in ethnic and geographical and linguistic minorities, but then the issue is that political concerns have become mutually exclusive, and there's no agreement even on the basics of what the state would look like, whether it would be a prime ministerial or presidential system, where the districts or provinces would be based, and so on. So there's a lot of issues that haven't been resolved, and that's making the writing of the new constitution extremely difficult.
Could we see a new civil war or an intensified war among Nepalis as they try to struggle over these very fundamental political issues?
I don't think there's any risk at all of war at the moment. They had a long civil war between 1996 and 2006, and I don't think anyone wants to go back to that. But I think what this demonstrates is that post-war there are a lot of unresolved issues that haven't been addressed, and these certainly have security implications. And if the economy continues to worsen and the political issues aren't resolved, then I think there's at least room for some kind of insecurity, although I doubt that there'll be another war of the sort they had previously.
Blair, the Accountability Lab, you are concerned with transparency and with democracy. Has democracy failed in Nepal?
I think democracy is more than elections. It's not a set of events, it's a process. And I think what's really encouraging in Nepal is there is a very vibrant civil society and incredible people with a lot of energy who are trying their best to hold power holders accountable in different ways. So that's why we're working here, trying to partner with some of them to develop new tools in that regard. And I find that very, very encouraging. Although the political situation is extremely difficult, I think there is room to do things outside the political system that can support democracy and that can build an inclusive and prosperous state in other ways.
Blair Glencorse is the founder of the Accountability Lab. He's in Kathmandu, Nepal, which sounds gorgeous except for the troubles. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. I'm John Batchelor.